It was the kind of relationship that seemed perfect from the outside. On paper, we were the couple everyone envied. Lena and I were both ambitious, driven, and living in the fast-paced world of high-powered careers. She was the woman I thought I would grow old with, the one I believed in when the world seemed uncertain. We had plans, big plans. And everything felt like it was going to be amazing. But the cracks were always there, hidden beneath the surface. It started with small arguments. The kind that didn't matter at the time. Little disagreements about work schedules or weekend plans. But as time passed, they grew. The more successful I became, the more distant she seemed. She'd say things like, "You're too focused on your career. We need balance." And at first, I dismissed it. I was building a future for us, wasn't I? But soon, her complaints became sharper, more pointed. And one evening, after another argument about my lack of attention, Lena said something that changed everything. "You're going to fail, you know that? You're so wrapped up in your work that you can't see how far you're falling. You'll be alone, and when you fail, I won't be here to pick up the pieces." I remember feeling a pang of disbelief. She had always been the one who stood by me, but now it felt like she was slipping away. That was the moment I started to see things clearly, not just about her, but about us. I realized that, no matter how much I loved her, she didn't believe in me. Her words stuck with me, and for the first time, I felt something in the pit of my stomach. Doubt. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized, she wasn't right. I wasn't going to fail. I was better than that. And I wasn't going to let anyone, especially her, tell me what I could or couldn't do. The truth was, I had been so focused on proving myself to Lena that I had neglected my own ambitions. I had focused on making her happy, and in doing so, I had forgotten to nurture my own dreams. But that was about to change. Over the next few weeks, I focused on what I truly wanted. I poured my energy into my work, into building my business, and into creating the life I had always envisioned. And with each step, I grew stronger. Meanwhile, Lena seemed to withdraw further. She had always been a part of my success, but now she felt more like a burden. Her negativity, her doubts, they were dragging me down. I was tired of it. One day, after another heated argument, I made a decision that would change everything. I ended things with Lena. I told her I couldn't continue like this, always being second to her doubts and insecurities. I had to choose me. The breakup wasn't clean. It wasn't easy. But I knew it was the right decision. I was no longer the man who needed her validation. I was stronger now, and I had a purpose. I moved forward, focusing on my career, on rebuilding my life without the weight of someone else's doubts. I didn't need to prove anything to Lena anymore. I was determined to prove it to myself. But little did I know, Lena's final words to me would come back to haunt her. After the breakup, I poured everything I had into my work. It was as though the pain of losing Lena became fuel for my fire. Every decision, every move I made was calculated. I didn't have time to dwell on the past. I focused on what came next. I had always been ambitious, but now, I was obsessed. I'd started my own tech company a few years before the breakup, but it had always been secondary to my relationship with Lena. I'd sacrificed time, energy, and focus to try and make her happy, but I had lost sight of my dreams in the process. Now, it was time to make up for that. I scaled the company quickly, landing new clients, building partnerships, and expanding my network. I became a force in the industry. The people who had once doubted me now began to take notice. My business grew exponentially, and with it, my influence. Then came the breakthrough, a game-changing deal with a major venture capital firm that would elevate my company to new heights. It wasn't just a financial victory. It was validation, a powerful statement that I was on the right path, that I had made the right decision by choosing myself. But while I was building my empire, Lena was falling apart. I didn't know exactly what was going on in her life at first, but one day I got a call from a mutual friend. They told me that Lena's career had stalled, and her relationship with her new boyfriend wasn't going well either. She had apparently thrown herself into another relationship to try and fill the void, but it wasn't working. Her life was in chaos. It didn't make me feel good to hear that, but it did make me realize something. Lena's doubt had been the catalyst for my growth. She had told me I would fail, that I wouldn't make it on my own. But here I was, succeeding beyond my wildest dreams. And here she was, struggling with the very things she had once thought I would never achieve. My company became a household name, and soon, I was sitting in rooms with some of the most powerful people in the industry. I was on the cover of business magazines, being interviewed on podcasts, and invited to exclusive events. I was untouchable. But even with all this success, I couldn't escape the thought of Lena. I wondered if she saw me now. Did she know what I had accomplished? Did she regret what she had said? I realized then that the power of her words, the pain of her betrayal, had driven me to become someone better. She had underestimated me, and now, I was more successful than she could have ever imagined. Months passed, and I didn't think about Lena much. I was too busy with the success I had built. I started dating again, meeting women who were ambitious, who saw me for who I was, not for who they wanted me to be. These relationships were different. They were based on respect, mutual understanding, and shared goals. But then came the unexpected. One night, I received a message from Lena. She had reached out, after all this time. The message was simple. I need to talk. Can we meet? I stared at the phone screen for a moment, unsure of how to feel. What did she want now? What had she been through since we last spoke? It was a moment I had never anticipated. But, in that moment, I realized something else. I had moved on. I was no longer the person who had been left behind. I had built a life of my own, and I didn't need closure from Lena. But a part of me knew this was something I couldn't ignore. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about what she had taken from me and how I had taken it all back. When I agreed to meet Lena, I had no idea what to expect. We hadn't spoken in months, and I had no intention of reopening old wounds. But something in her message stirred something in me, a curiosity I couldn't shake. Was she seeking closure? Was she trying to make amends? Or was this another one of her desperate attempts to regain control of the narrative? We met at a quiet cafe downtown. I arrived early, as usual, choosing a seat in the corner where I could keep an eye on the door. The cafe was nearly empty, and the ambience felt almost too calm for what was about to unfold. I wasn't nervous, but I was guarded. After everything that had happened, I wasn't going to let her off easy. When she walked in, I immediately noticed how much she had changed. She wasn't the confident woman I had known, the one who seemed like she had it all together. Now, she looked tired, worn down by whatever had happened since we broke up. But it was the look in her eyes that caught me off guard. There was a sense of vulnerability in her gaze, something I hadn't seen in years. She sat down across from me, her posture stiff, as though she was unsure of how to start. I remained calm, waiting for her to speak first. Finally, after a few moments of silence, she spoke. I don't expect you to forgive me, Lena began, her voice quiet, almost tentative. I know I messed up. I shouldn't have said those things to you. I thought I was right, but I was wrong. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I need you to know how sorry I am. I didn't say anything at first. The words she was saying weren't new to me. I'd heard them before, but they had always been said with an underlying tone of arrogance, like she expected me to just take her back. This time, though, there was something different in her demeanor. It was genuine regret, not the manipulative apology I had grown used to. You told me I'd fail, I said, leaning forward slightly, my voice steady but firm. You told me I'd never make it on my own. That I was too focused on my career and that it would ruin everything. But look at me now. Look at what I've built. Her eyes dropped to the table, and for a moment, I could see the weight of those words sink in. She had always been someone who thought she had control over me, over our relationship, over everything. But that power had always been an illusion. And now, I could see it. She knew it, too. I never thought you'd do it, she whispered. I never thought you'd succeed without me. I could feel the satisfaction rising in me, but I didn't let it show. This wasn't about revenge, it was about taking back control of my life. Lena had been the one who doubted me, who tried to push me down, but now I was the one in control. And I wasn't going to let her rewrite the story. I've learned something in all of this, I said, my voice calm, yet filled with conviction. The only person who can determine my worth is me. Not you, not anyone else. And if there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that I don't need anyone's validation. Not even yours. Her expression faltered, and for the first time, I saw a glimpse of realization in her eyes. She hadn't expected me to be so resolute. She hadn't expected me to be so strong. For the first time since the breakup, I finally felt like I had won. Not because I had beaten her, but because I had become the person I always knew I could be. A person who no longer relied on anyone else's approval. Lena stayed silent for a moment, her eyes searching mine as if trying to find something. But there was nothing left to find. I need to go, I said, standing up. You wanted closure, but you're not going to get that from me. What you get is the knowledge that I don't need you in my life anymore. And I'm better off without you. I turned and walked away, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't about making her feel guilty. It wasn't about getting back at her. It was about taking back my life, the life I had lost when I tried to please her, when I let her dictate who I should be. Now, I was finally free. The weeks that followed our meeting were the calmest I had felt in months. It was as though the final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place, and I could see my life clearly now. I wasn't angry at Chris anymore. I didn't need to seek revenge or get any form of retribution. I had already won. I focused on my business, expanding my company and reaching new heights. The success I had achieved wasn't just about financial gain, it was about proving to myself that I could stand on my own 2 feet, without anyone's validation. I was on a new path, one that I had forged myself. But Chris's shadow still lingered. Despite all the progress I had made, I knew there was something he hadn't let go of, and that was his guilt. He had tried to rebuild his career, and by all accounts, it seemed like he was getting back on track. But I couldn't shake the feeling that his newfound success was just another facade. I was right. One afternoon, out of the blue, I received a phone call from an anonymous source within Chris's company. They told me something I didn't expect. Chris had been running his company into the ground, making questionable business decisions that were putting everything at risk. His staff was leaving, investors were pulling out, and he was on the verge of losing everything. At first, I didn't know how to feel. It wasn't schadenfreude that I felt. It wasn't satisfaction. What I felt was more like clarity. He had treated me like an obstacle, and in the end, it was his own choices that had led him to this point. Karma had caught up with him, and it wasn't my job to save him. But as time passed, I realized something else. His failure wasn't just a result of his actions. It was the consequence of his lack of vision, of the way he had always doubted me, of the way he had assumed that his success would be guaranteed by the power of his charm and status. He thought he could walk away from me, and that everything would fall into place. What he didn't see was that the decisions we make in our lives are always intertwined with others. And when you leave someone behind, someone who truly believed in you, the impact of that choice reverberates in ways you can't predict. One day, I received an unexpected email. It was from Chris himself, and for a moment, I hesitated. The subject line read, "I need to apologize." I opened the email, and there, in black and white, was everything I had been waiting for. I've hit rock bottom. I've lost everything. And the one thing I regret most is the way I treated you. I never gave you the credit you deserved. I thought I could do it all on my own, but I was wrong. I need you now. I read those words over and over again, but something in me had changed. The man who once left me behind, thinking I would never rise, was now the one who had fallen. But I didn't feel the vindication I thought I would. I didn't feel like the world had finally given me justice. All I felt was emptiness. I didn't respond to him. I didn't need to. His apology wasn't for me. It was for him, to ease his conscience. He thought that by admitting his mistakes, he could somehow fix what had been broken. But the truth was, it was too late. I had already rebuilt my life without him. And in that moment, I realized the most powerful thing of all: I didn't need him anymore. I moved on with my life, focusing on my career, building relationships, and embracing my newfound sense of freedom. And while Chris continued to struggle, I couldn't help but feel grateful for everything that had happened. It had shaped me into the man I was today. I had succeeded. And I had done it on my own. Months had passed since Chris reached out to me. His company was failing, his personal life a mess, and yet, I felt no satisfaction. I had moved on, built my success from the ground up, and had no desire to return to the past. I had found peace within myself, and that was worth more than any apology or regret he could offer. But the universe, as it often does, had a way of throwing a wrench into even the most peaceful lives. I was at a conference one evening, a room filled with entrepreneurs, investors, and influencers. As I made my way through the crowd, engaging with clients and potential partners, I spotted a familiar face, Chris. He was standing across the room, talking to a group of investors, his demeanor still confident but his eyes telling a different story. He noticed me almost instantly, and the moment our eyes met, I could see the flicker of panic cross his face. The room felt smaller, and for a moment, it was like we were the only two people there. He excused himself from the group and made his way toward me, looking like a man who had no choice but to approach. I had to admit, seeing him again stirred something deep inside me. Not anger or resentment, but a kind of indifference I hadn't expected. He wasn't the man I remembered. He wasn't the confident, arrogant man who had left me and built his success on the foundation of my failure. Now, he was a man who had been humbled, stripped of his pride, and left with nothing. He approached slowly, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, his voice tight, almost unsure. I stood my ground. This wasn't about me, and it wasn't about him. This was about power, the power I had taken back and that he had lost. I smiled, but it wasn't a smile of comfort. It was a smile of acknowledgement, of knowing that I no longer needed to prove anything to him. "I didn't expect to see you here either," I replied coolly, keeping my voice calm and measured. "But I suppose we all run in the same circles eventually." Chris looked at me, clearly uncomfortable, but I could tell he was struggling to maintain his composure. "Listen, I know you don't owe me anything," he said, his eyes pleading. "But I'm trying to get back on track. I've lost everything, and I'm trying to rebuild. I need your help. I need someone who can see through the bullshit, someone who understands how to navigate this world." I paused, letting his words sink in. He was asking for my help. This was the same man who had dismissed me, who had betrayed me, and now he was looking to me for a lifeline. The irony of it all wasn't lost on me. But what I felt in that moment wasn't sympathy. It wasn't vengeance either. It was something far more powerful: clarity. "You need to fix yourself, Chris," I said, my voice steady, but firm. "I've already done what you're trying to do. I've already fought my way to the top, and I did it on my own. I don't need to help you anymore. What you need is to stop relying on others and take responsibility for your own failures. Only then can you rebuild." For a long moment, he just stared at me, as if waiting for something, some sign that I would offer him what he wanted. But I had nothing left to give. I wasn't the man who had once needed his validation. I was someone else now. "I understand," he whispered, before turning away. "I should have never left you." As he walked away, I felt nothing. No anger. No relief. Just peace. For the first time, I realized that the last laugh wasn't about making him suffer. It wasn't about holding on to the past. It was about moving on, about standing strong in who I had become, and knowing that I was better off without him. As I continued with my life, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the lessons I had learned. I had come out of the darkness, and I was no longer the person who had been torn apart by betrayal. I was whole, stronger, and ready for whatever came next. Life, it seemed, was moving in my favor. I had built myself up, brick by brick, and now, I was standing on the foundation of everything I had worked for. My business was thriving, my social circle was filled with genuine connections, and I no longer felt the weight of the past pulling me down. But despite all the progress, I couldn't shake the thought of Chris's final words to me that night at the gala. He said he should have never left me. He said he understood everything he'd done wrong. But did he really? For a while, I didn't hear from him again. I continued to live my life, focusing on my work and my own happiness. But then, the call came. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang. The name on the screen read, Chris Callahan. I stared at it for a moment, wondering if I should pick it up. After everything, I had convinced myself that he had already done his part in trying to make amends, and that was the end of it. But the call persisted. So, I answered. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "What's up?" There was a long pause on the other end, and for a moment, I almost regretted answering. But then, I heard his voice, cracked and vulnerable. "I've made a huge mistake, and I need your help. I know you're probably done with me, but I've hit rock bottom. I have no one else to turn to." I wasn't sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to shut him down immediately, to remind him of the years he had spent treating me like a second choice, as if my dreams and ambitions were insignificant to him. But another part of me felt a strange sense of sympathy. After all, he had been through a lot, and it wasn't easy watching someone fall from the top. "Chris, I've moved on," I said calmly. "I'm not here to fix your life. I've built mine from the ground up, and I'm not about to let you pull me back into your mess." But he wasn't giving up that easily. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he continued, his voice full of regret. "But I've learned that you were right. I tried to make it about her, about the wrong things. I should have been more focused on myself, on the future. And now, I've lost everything. I need you to help me." I took a deep breath. The old me would have felt sympathy. The old me might have agreed to help. But not anymore. I wasn't the man who needed to please anyone. Not Chris. Not Samantha. "You've made your bed, Chris," I said, my voice firm but measured. "And now you have to lie in it. I've been where you are, but I moved on. I built myself back up. You can do the same, but I'm not going to be your savior. You need to start taking responsibility for your own life." There was silence on the other end. Then, finally, he spoke. "I understand. I thought you would want to hear me out. I thought we could be friends again." I felt a strange sense of closure in those words. Chris wasn't looking for redemption anymore. He wasn't asking for me back. He was asking for help, but he wasn't ready to face the reality of what he had done. "Goodbye, Chris," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I hope you find the peace you're looking for. But we're not part of each other's lives anymore." I hung up the phone, feeling lighter than I had in a long time. The man who had once had such power over me, who had left me broken and questioning my worth, was now asking for my help. And I was done. The next few days passed, and I thought about the conversation. It wasn't the closure I had hoped for, but it was the one I needed. I realized that my journey wasn't about making him regret his decision. It was about embracing my own growth, my own success. And as I continued to build my business, my friendships, and my life, I knew that I had won. Not because of anything he had done, but because of everything I had achieved on my own. It had been months since Chris reached out to me. I had refused to let his desperation derail the progress I had made. Each day, I grew stronger, more confident in myself and my capabilities. The lessons I had learned, the ones forged through pain, betrayal, and self-discovery, were now part of who I was. And they were guiding me forward. I didn't need Chris. I didn't need anyone to validate my worth or measure my success. My career, my life, and my happiness were mine to control, and I had learned that the only person who could hold me back was me. My business was flourishing, and I had become a name in the industry. I was constantly getting offers for partnerships, speaking engagements, and media appearances. Opportunities were pouring in, and I was beginning to feel the fruits of my labor. For the first time in my life, I felt completely in control of my destiny. But even with all the success, there was something inside me that still wondered about Chris. Was he doing better? Had he learned from his mistakes? I was no longer angry at him, but I couldn't help but feel curious. One evening, I received a message from an old friend of mine, someone who had stayed in touch with both me and Chris after the breakup. It was a simple message. Chris needs your help. He's in trouble. I think you're the only one who can help him. I stared at the message for a moment, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to ignore it. After all, I had moved on. I had worked too hard to let him pull me back into his world of mistakes and regrets. But another part of me remembered the pain I had felt, the heartache, and the betrayal. Could I help him now? I thought about it for a while, weighing the decision. Could I let go of the past completely? Was I ready to truly forgive him, not for him, but for me? The answer, I realized, was no. I had already moved on. I didn't need closure from him anymore. What mattered now was my own peace. And I wasn't going to let his issues affect my newfound sense of self. But despite my resolve, I couldn't just leave him stranded. There was a part of me that still cared, even if it was just a flicker of the man I once loved. So, I agreed to meet him one last time. But this wasn't going to be about me fixing him. This was going to be about him facing the consequences of his actions, and taking responsibility for what he had done. We met in a small park. Chris was waiting by the bench, his back turned. When he saw me, he didn't speak immediately. He just stood there, looking at me as though he wasn't sure if I was the same person who had once stood by his side. He looked tired, worn out, and like someone who had lost everything, and now, he was looking for a way back. "I don't know what to say," he finally said, his voice shaky. "I don't deserve your help, but I need it. I've messed everything up." I watched him closely, the man who had once been so sure of himself. Now, he was broken, vulnerable. The man who had once left me was now asking me for something. I didn't feel any anger, but I didn't feel sympathy either. "I can't help you fix what you've destroyed, Chris," I said firmly. "I've moved on, and I don't need to drag myself back into your mess." His eyes dropped to the ground, and for a moment, I saw the man who had once been so arrogant, now crushed by the weight of his own regret. But that wasn't my burden to carry anymore. "I've learned the hardest way that I can't change the past," he said quietly. "And I understand now that I was the one who destroyed everything. I ruined my life by pushing you away, by thinking I was better than you." I nodded, feeling calm. This was his journey, and it wasn't my responsibility to fix it. "You're right," I said, my voice steady. "But it's time to move forward. It's time for you to do the same." With that, I stood up and walked away. There was no anger, no satisfaction, just the certainty that I had moved on. It wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about revenge. It was about me finally accepting the power I had reclaimed. And knowing that the past was just that, the past. Now, it was time for me to look forward and keep building the future I had worked so hard for. Months went by, and life continued to unfold in ways I hadn't anticipated. Chris was no longer a part of my day-to-day thoughts, and I had truly found peace. I focused on what mattered, my business, my personal growth, and the relationships I was building around me. I was thriving in every aspect of my life. But life has a funny way of testing us when we least expect it. It happened on a cold, rainy afternoon when I received a call that would change everything. It was from one of my business partners, who had always been in the loop about everything that was happening in the industry. "Hey, I've got some news. You're not going to like this, but I need you to hear it," he said, his tone serious. I listened intently, sensing that this wasn't just another business update. "There's been a scandal involving one of our competitors, and it's blowing up online. The CEO of their company, you remember Chris, right?" I felt a jolt of emotion at the mention of his name, but I quickly pushed it down. It wasn't my problem anymore. Yeah, I remember him, I said, trying to stay neutral. What's going on? My partner continued, explaining that Chris had been caught in a massive scandal. Apparently, his company had been involved in unethical business practices, and now, it was all coming to light. Investors were pulling out, clients were canceling contracts, and the media was hounding him. But here's the part that caught me off guard. Chris's company was on the brink of collapse, and he needed help. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to turn away, to walk away from it all. I had already moved on, and the last thing I wanted was to get involved in his mess again. But another part of me felt something different, something I hadn't expected. Sympathy? Was it possible that after all this time, I still cared? I tried to push that thought aside. I had built my life without him, and I wasn't about to let his failure pull me back into his world. I took a deep breath and made a decision. I wasn't going to let Chris ruin my peace. I was done being pulled into his drama. But I also realized that if I didn't step in, everything he had worked for could fall apart, and that wasn't something I could ignore. I called Chris, despite every instinct telling me not to. When he answered, his voice was strained, almost desperate. I don't know what to do, he said. Everything's falling apart. I've made mistakes, and now the whole company is collapsing. I need your help. I paused for a moment, thinking about the man I had once loved. The man who had left me, the man who had doubted me, the man who now had nothing left. But I wasn't the same person I had been back then. I had my own life, my own goals, and my own empire to protect. Still, I felt a strange sense of responsibility to help him, not because I owed him anything, but because I was better than the bitterness that had once consumed me. I'll help you, I said, my voice calm, but firm. But you need to understand that I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because I can't watch someone else suffer because of their own mistakes. I'll give you advice, but you have to start taking responsibility for your actions. Chris agreed, and we began working together to salvage what was left of his company. It wasn't easy. There were tense moments, difficult decisions, and a lot of long nights. But I saw something in him, genuine effort, a willingness to learn from his mistakes. I helped him navigate through the mess, rebuilding relationships with clients and investors. Slowly but surely, his company started to stabilize. It wasn't the success he had once dreamed of, but it was better than nothing. And as he began to rebuild, I couldn't help but notice how much more respectful he had become. He wasn't the man who had left me behind anymore. But I realized something as I worked alongside him. This was the last chapter. I wasn't going to be his savior, and I wasn't going to let his mistakes define me. I had helped him because I was better than holding grudges, not because I wanted to rekindle anything between us. It was clear that, in the end, he had lost, but he had learned the most valuable lesson, that his downfall was his own doing. As for me, I had already won. And I wasn't looking back. It had been several months since I first helped Chris salvage his business. Things were better, at least on the surface. His company had stabilized, but I could tell that he was still trying to find his way. I could see him making progress, but it was clear that he wasn't the man I once knew. And that was okay. I had done my part. I had helped him because I believed in the principle of redemption, not because I wanted anything in return. As time went on, I realized that the more distance I put between us, the clearer it became that our lives had diverged completely. I wasn't the person I had been when we first met. I had changed, and I was proud of it. But it was time for me to close this chapter of my life. One evening, as I was winding down after a long day, I received a text from Chris. I hesitated before reading it. I had moved on, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for whatever was coming next. I need to talk. Can we meet? I sighed. I had been expecting this moment, the moment he'd try to hold on, the moment he would ask for something more. But this time, I wasn't going to let him have any more of my energy. I had already given him enough. Still, there was something in the back of my mind that urged me to meet him. I wasn't sure what for, but I knew I had to face it one last time. So, I agreed to meet him at a nearby park. When I arrived, Chris was already sitting on a bench. He looked more vulnerable than I had seen him in a long time. The arrogance, the confidence that had once been so familiar, it was gone. Now, he seemed like someone who had learned the hard way. "Thanks for meeting me," he said quietly as I sat down next to him. "I know this isn't easy for you." I didn't respond right away. There was nothing to say. I had already forgiven him in my own way. I had moved on, and now, I was finally ready to let go of the past. "I just wanted to say thank you," he continued, his eyes looking down at his hands. "For helping me when I was at my lowest. I don't know how I would have gotten through it without you. But I get it now. I've messed up. I lost the best thing I ever had." For a moment, I felt something stir inside me, the old Chris. The man I once loved, the man who had been my everything. But I didn't dwell on it. I had already healed. I had already become stronger. "Chris," I said softly, but firmly, "I've moved on. I'm happy with the life I've built. I'm not the same person who needed your approval. I don't need to hear you apologize again. What I needed to hear was that you've learned from your mistakes. That's all I wanted." He nodded slowly, his eyes meeting mine with an expression of deep regret. "I have learned. And I think you're right. The person I am now is because of the choices I made, and I can't undo that. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm sorry for everything. And I'm glad you're happy." There it was. The moment I had been waiting for. Closure. "Thank you, Chris," I said, standing up. "That's all I needed. You've learned your lesson, and now it's time for both of us to move forward." As I walked away from that park, I realized that this was the final chapter. No more looking back. The past had shaped me, but it was no longer a part of who I was becoming. Chris would always be part of my history, but he no longer had the power to define my future. I was no longer the person who had been abandoned and betrayed. I was the person who had risen above it all. I had won, not because of anything he had done, but because I had found my own strength. And with that, I turned the page. It had been several months since that final conversation with Chris, and my life had transformed in ways I had never imagined. I had taken back control of my destiny, rebuilt my career, and embraced my own happiness. There was no looking back, and I knew that this was only the beginning. As I walked through the city streets, I could feel the energy that surrounded me. Everything was moving forward, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was running to catch up. I was exactly where I was meant to be. I had built something important, something that made me proud. I had created a company that wasn't just successful, but impactful. I had built relationships with people who shared my values, my vision, and my commitment to growth. And most importantly, I had found peace within myself. It was strange how life had a way of bringing things full circle. The pain I had once felt, the heartbreak, the moments of doubt, had all led me to this point. I had learned that no one could take away your power unless you let them. I had allowed myself to be vulnerable before, to let someone else's actions define my worth. But now, I was in control. And that control came with an understanding that I didn't need anyone else to validate me. I had become the man I always knew I could be, strong, independent, and unafraid of the future. The past was just a lesson, not a weight I carried with me. I wasn't alone in this journey. I had my friends, my mentors, and even the people I had met along the way who had helped me rebuild my life. Sarah, my best friend, was there every step of the way. She had seen me at my lowest, and now, she was celebrating the success with me. Our bond was stronger than ever, built on trust and mutual respect. One night, as I sat in my office, looking out over the city, I received a text message from Lena, the woman who had once told me I'd fail. The one who had cast doubt on my ability to succeed. I hadn't heard from her in over a year. "I saw what you've been doing. You've really turned everything around. I'm sorry for what I said, and for the way things ended. You were right about everything. I'm happy to see you've found your path." I sat there for a moment, reading her message over and over again. A part of me felt a strange nostalgia, but it wasn't the kind of longing I had once felt. It wasn't about wishing things had turned out differently. It was about acknowledging that I had outgrown that version of myself. I had moved on. And now, it felt like a part of me had finally let go. "Thank you for your message," I replied, my fingers tapping out the words. "I've moved forward. And so should you." I put the phone down, staring at the city lights flickering below me. I had succeeded. More than I could have ever hoped for, and I had done it on my terms. Not because of anyone else's approval, not because of their doubts or fears, but because I believed in myself. That was the key. I had built my future, brick by brick, without looking over my shoulder. I wasn't the man who had been left behind anymore. I was the man who had walked away and created something more. As I stood up from my desk and looked out the window once more, I realized that this was only the beginning. There was so much more ahead of me, so many opportunities, challenges, and triumphs. And I was ready for it all. Because I had learned the most important lesson of all: the best revenge is living well.